Hey there, I'm Wes Rogers. I'm the technical agronomist for Bayer Crop Science, covering West Tennessee. Today I'm coming to you from a field near Trenton, Tennessee, and the hybrid behind me here specifically is DCAP 6618. It's one of the newer DCAP products in the portfolio that many growers are just getting to experience for the first time this growing season. The topic of discussion this week and the phone calls I've received have been around what kind of stress am I going to see during these high heat periods on some of this later planted corn that, as you can see, the same as this field, has not began the pollination process yet. The reason this is an issue is usually our pollination period is about a week-long process. That corn plant can shed pollen for over a week. Tries to do that in the morning and the afternoons when the heat's not so bad. And it, as well as the pollen grains, they can remain viable or effective for 18 to 24 hours. What we're going to see with these high heat temperatures, if you look at the weather forecast every 5 minutes like I do, you can easily see that our temperature is going to be in the upper 90s every day, and more unfortunately, it's going to be in the upper 70s every night. So our corn maturity is going to move at a rapid pace. It's going to have to do this in a less amount of time. So instead of having that week-long pollen shed that we normally have, it's going to be reduced to just a few days, and some of that pollen grain that's going to be released, instead of it being viable for 18 to 20 hours, it's only going to be viable for about 2 hours, 3 hours, which will cause some issues with kernel set. I don't think this will be a widespread issue, but some of our stress-prone areas of the fields that typically have a lower yield anyway, we may have even some lower yields in those areas where we have a reduced kernel set due to heat stress during pollination. It's 110-degree heat index here currently in Trenton, and I promise you if it's hot here, it's even hotter in Scott, Mississippi. Jay Mahaffey at the Scott Learning Center in Scott, Mississippi has some more information on this topic that he wants to share with you today.
Well, thanks, Wes. We have done some work in the last several years dealing with the issues of pollination, tip back, evaluating a whole variety of things in corn, and I think it's worthwhile to have a little conversation about all of it. A lot of this will be as much diagnostic as it will a direct story about exactly what happens in 2020, but I think there's things we can learn by going out and looking at our cornfields through the pollination period and into the season. So the first thing that comes to mind when we start talking about this is tip back. And we talk about tip back like it's sort of mysterious, but I think we're learning a lot of things about it and have learned a lot of things about it in recent times. It's really the abortion of kernels on the tip of the ear. What the corn plant senses is that it can only support so many kernels on a cob because you got a variety of things that influence the size of the cob. One of those being how many kernels actually form. Then there's the issue about how many of those pollinate. And there's also another physiological component of that, that's how many the plant can carry. And all of these things happen sort of simultaneously in cornfields. So I thought I'd show you some examples of all of it, and we'll talk about some of the potential implications that new hybrids have had on that sort of a relationship. We expect some tip back to occur. Excessive tip back and pollination problems can occur for a lot of reasons, weather being one of those. In short, the plants talk to us. They tell us what's happened in the field when it comes to the weather and all the inputs that we apply, and sometimes we just need to go out and look. So let's talk about a few of the individual cases. These are actually really the four components of what I'm talking about when I refer to either tip back or pollination issues that occur in the cornfield. Each one is a distinct case in its own, and each one has its own sort of root causes and interpretation. When you look at the first one of these, this is something that comes as a result of some other research we've done over the years. When you go out and see kernels that are in rows on a cob that are in relatively straight lines, the corn cob looks normally formed, but it's filled all the way to the tip of the ear. The potential causes of that are typically low population or fertility that was a little bit too much for the conditions that we had. Now, if you have this happen in a dryland cornfield, sometimes it happens and we can't help it. That just means it rained and we were prepared for one level of yield and we were able to attain another. So we left a little on the table. But regardless, this is what happens when I either have too much fertility or the population is too low for the condition. The next one is the one that was the subject of this particular question, and that is pollination problems. Typically, those are environmental. They can be heat at pollination, lack of water, things that drive up the plant temperature about the time the pollen sheds and the corn actually pollinates right after tassel. Potential solutions for this are easier to say a lot of times than they are actually enact. Planting a little bit earlier, which we can't help if it rains in the early season, irrigation and things that help the plants not undergo such water stress. And then hybrid is having a pretty significant impact on this, and we'll talk about that right at the end. So when you think about excessive tip back, this is another case. I actually induced all of these problems that I've shown you on the screen, or actually caused the correct appearance of some of the ones that are as good as they can be. But this excessive tip back is really the result of stresses that have allowed the plant or forced the plant to decide it's only going to be able to fill so many kernels down the cob, and it's aborted some of those on the tip. I would add too that this is a similar thing to what cotton does. You could view the fruit shed that occurs in cotton post bloom a lot of times like tip back. The field has basically reached carrying capacity and it can't carry any more fruit, so it aborts some. Corn plant does it in a different way, in a different time, different place, but it's the same sort of relationship. A lot of things can cause this. Stress during the time when the corn is deciding how many kernels it can actually carry. Populations that are too high for the fertility levels in the field, and then low fertility as a background sort of a cause. Drought and a lot of other things that cause stresses can be the root of this. So the appropriate tip back that we're aiming for is good pollination with tip back about this far down the cob. All this really indicates is that we burned up the fertility we applied to the field. We had the right balance of population and fertility present for whatever conditions were there. We didn't buy a lot of extra fertility, and we maximized our investment in seed. So when you think about some of the things, and this is really food for thought as much as it is a dead answer, but when you think about some of the things that actually influence this relationship, hybrid cannot be left out of the conversation. When you look at some of the new hybrids that we are dealing with today, particularly the ones that are more successful and on bigger acres, things like 7027, 6744, they are typically developed in systems that are locally derived here in the Mid-South. In other words, they were selected or at least finished part of their breeding process in these really high heat index conditions that we have currently. These are our results from 2018, and 2019 is very similar. Now, I realize this graph looks like there are big differences, but the base of it's 200 bushels, so don't be concerned with that. But when you look at it, the same cast of characters that are present, all of these hybrids yielded more than about 210 bushels. Some of them got close to 260. And the ones that are remarkably successful through the marketplace today are some of the higher yielding ones. I think this is an indication that we have hybrids today that are at least in the best position that we could be in when we engage in trying to grow corn in these really high heat index, high humidity, high temperature sort of environments. So the question is the heat at pollination going to affect us? That's really an unknown at this point, but I do think that our positioning of how we choose hybrids, what we plant, and the fact that we now have these localized breeding efforts are going to put us in the best position possible. We can go out and take the first part of this presentation, diagnose our fields, and see what might have happened through the late season. One of the things I would add in conclusion to that, though, is if you look around the mid-southern corn growing experience, for a long time, we all had in a community fields here, there, and yonder that didn't pollinate well, and we still have a few of those. But there are remarkably less of them today than there have been historically. That's in my own evaluation of it from a distance. But the truth is, I think that the fact that we have better adapted hybrids are making that better. We're also better corn farmers than we've been historically. And by that, and not to mean we're doing anything wrong, but we plant quicker, we have larger machines, and we get things done in cornfields like they really need to be done in the optimal way. So if you'd like to talk about this in any more detail, feel free to drop me an email at the address on the screen or call my mobile there on the screen. Your local Bayer reps, Wes, and everyone in the field will be certainly happy to have a deeper conversation about this. And we look forward to seeing you at the Learning Center this summer. Come see us if you can. Thanks.